Pam Bondi walked into the courtroom with her usual confident stride, her sharp legal mind ready for battle. Across the bench, the judge leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He had seen plenty of attorneys try to argue their cases, and to him, Pam was just another lawyer trying to prove a point. As she organized her notes, the judge let out a small chuckle. "Ms. Bondi, I hope you have something compelling today. We wouldn't want to waste the court's time now."
Would we?
His condescending tone hung in the air, but Pam didn't flinch. She simply looked up, met his gaze, and smiled. "Your Honor, I think you'll find today's proceedings quite enlightening." The opposing counsel, a seasoned attorney known for his aggressive tactics, smirked as well. He had faced Pam before and believed he knew what to expect, but today, he had underestimated her. Pam began her argument with precision, laying out her points clearly and methodically. The judge leaned on one hand, half listening, still convinced this would be an easy case to dismiss. But as she continued, something changed. She presented case law after case law, citing precedents that had been overlooked. She dissected the opposing counsel's arguments with surgical precision, exposing flaws they hadn't even realized existed. The courtroom grew silent. Even the spectators could sense the shift in power. The judge, who had started the hearing with an air of superiority, now sat up straight, his smirk fading. Pam paused for a moment, letting her last statement sink in before continuing. "Your Honor, as you can see, the legal foundation my client stands on is not only solid, but indisputable." The opposing attorney scrambled through his notes, searching for a rebuttal, but it was clear. Pam had dismantled his case piece by piece. The judge cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the weight of her argument. He leaned forward, now fully engaged. "Ms. Bondi, you're saying that based on these precedents, the ruling in this case must align with—" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Your Honor," she interrupted, her voice unwavering. "The law is clear, and there is no room for misinterpretation." The judge hesitated. It was clear he had walked into this hearing underestimating her, but now he had no choice but to acknowledge her legal brilliance. The courtroom, once filled with quiet skepticism, now held an air of respect. Finally, after a long pause, the judge let out a breath and nodded. "Ms. Bondi, I have to admit I did not expect such a compelling argument today, but after reviewing your points, I find myself in agreement. The motion is granted." A wave of quiet murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Pam simply gathered her notes, nodded politely, and turned to leave. As she walked out, she couldn't help but notice the judge watching her, this time with admiration rather than condescension. He had underestimated her, but now he would never make that mistake again. As Pam Bondi turned to leave, the opposing attorney quickly stood up. "Your Honor, I must protest. This ruling is highly unusual, and I believe there's room for reconsideration." The judge, still visibly processing everything he had just heard, adjusted his glasses and shook his head. "Counselor, unless you can present new evidence or a more compelling legal argument, this matter is settled." Pam paused, her expression calm but firm. She had seen this before, opposing counsel grasping at straws after realizing they had been outmaneuvered. She turned back around, stepping toward the podium once more. "Your Honor, if I may," she said smoothly. The judge nodded, giving her the floor. Pam held up a document. "For the record, I anticipated this argument, and I'd like to direct the court to this additional case precedent, which further reinforces my position." She handed the document to the clerk, who quickly passed it to the judge. The opposing attorney's face paled as he recognized the case. It was a devastating blow to his argument. The judge skimmed through the highlighted sections before exhaling sharply. "Well," he said, glancing up at Pam, "it appears you have covered every possible angle, Ms. Bondi." He set the paper down and turned to the opposing counsel. "I see no grounds for reconsideration. This court stands by its ruling." Pam nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." The opposing attorney sat down heavily, realizing he had no moves left. The judge, now fully aware of Pam's legal expertise, looked at her with something resembling respect. "Ms. Bondi," he said, a small smile breaking through his once smug expression, "I must admit, you've given this court quite the legal education today." Pam gave a polite but knowing smile. "Just doing my job, Your Honor." With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the polished courtroom floor. The spectators whispered among themselves, and even the court reporter looked impressed. As she stepped outside, a young law student who had been watching the proceedings hurried after her. "Ms. Bondi, that was incredible. The way you argued, how—" "Did you know exactly what the judge and opposing counsel would say?" Pam glanced at the eager student and smiled. "Experience, and always being 10 steps ahead." With that, she walked off, leaving behind a courtroom that would never again doubt her brilliance. As Pam Bondi stepped outside the courtroom, a group of reporters immediately swarmed her, microphones and cameras at the ready. "Ms. Bondi, that was a stunning victory. How did you manage to turn the judge's skepticism into admiration?" one journalist asked. Pam gave a confident yet composed smile. "The law speaks for itself. My job is to ensure that it's applied fairly and correctly." Another reporter pushed forward. "Did you anticipate the judge's initial reaction? He seemed almost dismissive at first." Pam's eyes flickered with amusement. "I've been in enough courtrooms to recognize when someone underestimates me. That's never something I take personally. My focus is always on the facts, the law, and delivering the best argument possible." Just then, a senior legal analyst from a major news network chimed in. "Many are calling your performance today a masterclass in legal strategy. How do you prepare for moments like these?" Pam considered the question for a moment before responding. "Preparation is everything. I study the case inside and out. I anticipate every possible argument from the opposing side, and I ensure that I have the strongest counter-arguments ready. It's not about theatrics, it's about making sure the law is upheld." As the cameras continued flashing, Pam noticed the opposing counsel walking out of the courthouse looking frustrated and defeated. He caught her gaze, hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his tone more measured than it had been in the courtroom. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to have such a bulletproof argument. You caught me off guard." Pam extended a hand. "The law doesn't favor those who rely on assumptions. It favors those who do their homework." The opposing attorney chuckled, shaking her hand. "Well, lesson learned." Just then, a clerk rushed out of the courthouse, breathless. "Ms. Bondi!" "The judge asked me to deliver a message. He said he hopes to see you in his courtroom again soon. He was quite impressed." Pam nodded, a knowing glint in her eye. "Tell His Honor I appreciate the sentiment." With that, she turned and walked down the courthouse steps, leaving behind a legacy of yet another flawless courtroom victory. As she disappeared into the crowd, the reporters, the legal analysts, and even her opponents all knew one thing for certain. Pam Bondi was a force to be reckoned with, and no judge would ever laugh at her again. As Pam Bondi made her way to her car, she felt the buzz of her phone in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from a longtime colleague. "Brilliant work today. The judge didn't see that coming. Drinks on me tonight?" She smirked, typing back a quick reply. "You know I never turn down a victory toast." Before she could put her phone away, another notification popped up. A news alert. Pam Bondi's legal masterclass. How she stunned a smug judge and won big in court. She shook her head with amusement. The media had picked up the story faster than she expected, but she wasn't surprised. When you deliver a performance like that in a high-profile case, people take notice. As she opened her car door, a voice called out behind her. "Ms. Bondi, wait!" She turned to see a young woman in a business suit carrying a leather-bound notebook. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm a law student at the university, and I was in the courtroom today. That was incredible." Pam smiled, leaning against the car. I appreciate that. You're studying law? The young woman nodded eagerly. Yes, and watching you today, it was like a masterclass in courtroom strategy. How do you stay so composed even when the judge is against you? Pam tilted her head, considering the question. The law is like chess. It's not about reacting emotionally. It's about being 3 steps ahead. If you know your case inside and out, if you anticipate every argument before it happens, then nothing surprises you. The student nodded, scribbling furiously in her notebook. And when a judge is dismissive, how do you handle that? Pam chuckled. You let your argument do the talking. When you're right, when your facts are airtight, even the most skeptical. Judge has to listen. The young woman beamed. Thank you, Ms. Bondi. I hope I can argue like that one day. Pam reached into her bag, pulling out a business card. You will, if you put in the work. Stay in touch. The student's eyes widened as she took the card. Wow, thank you. I will. Pam gave her a nod before stepping into her car. As she drove away, she reflected on the day. It wasn't just about winning cases. It was about setting a standard. A reminder to everyone in that courtroom that preparation, intelligence, and resilience would always outshine arrogance. And as for the judge, he would think twice before smirking at Pam Bondi again.